Chapter 15, The Great Reset. An important reason to exercise skepticism and neutrality is to gain perspective on trends that vested interests might portray to you as inevitable. An article published by the World Economic Forum in 2016 titled, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better," written by Danish politician Ida Auken, was part of a series of predictions for the year 2030. Auken described a futuristic scenario where traditional ownership of goods is replaced by access to services. She clarified that this was not a utopian vision, but rather a speculative scenario showing potential future developments, quote, "for better and for worse," unquote. Still, these ideas were upsetting to many people, and it caused a backlash. Perhaps what contributed to the backlash was the World Economic Forum's Great Reset initiative, which was launched ostensibly in response to the economic disruptions caused by COVID-19, although critics will note that the quite robust Great Reset vision was already suspiciously well developed early in the pandemic, suggesting it had been in the works for years. The World Economic Forum removed the original "Welcome to 2030" article from its website due to the backlash, and clarified its stance, stating that such predictions were speculative scenarios rather than prescriptions or goals. This did not allay everyone's concerns. Critics have noted, for instance, that some of the world's large financial institutions are purchasing many individual homes to rent out in certain markets, and they wonder whether this pattern encourages a trend away from home ownership and ownership of other kinds, a trend that turns more and more citizens into habitual renters. Critics notice that a small group of wealthy individuals and elites cooperate with each other's business objectives, gathering together at exclusive annual meetings in places like Jackson Hole, Davos, hosted by the World Economic Forum, and so on, to network and to influence policy. Remember what comedian George Carlin said: "You and I are not in the club." Whether or not you agree, that's how many ordinary people think about the aristocracy class. Whenever there seems to be a lack of transparency or that elites appear to exercise undue influence, whenever there seems to be class-based exclusion in a given sphere or initiative, whenever there is imbalance among individuals and communities and institutions, some of the people will be suspicious or resentful. My understanding is that the Baha'i teachings call for decentralization, local control of the processes of development, and for cooperation and reciprocity between and among the individual, the community, and the institutions. My perspective, however, is that current power structures reinforce tendencies towards the centralization of power and a top-down approach to planning, policy, and governance. I think that's a recipe for conflict. Abdu'l-Baha visited the Church of Ascension in New York City on June 2nd, 1912, and spoke to the congregation saying, quote, "It is very evident that in the future there shall be no centralization in the countries of the world, be they constitutional in government, republican, or democratic in form. The United States may be held up as the example of future government. That is to say, each province will be independent in itself, but there will be federal union protecting the interests of the various independent states. To cast aside centralization, which promotes despotism, is the exigency of the time. This will be productive of international peace." Today, in 2025, there is a lot of wealth and power held by few hands. This facilitates despotic behavior, which pushes peace further away. If you have been paying close attention to independent media in recent years, you might have noticed that some faction of wealth and power, perhaps more than one faction, has facilitated the practice of forced migration into some nation-states. Forced migration has become a weapon to destabilize adversaries. If this comes as a surprise to you, then investigate this matter through independent sources, and you will find the evidence for my statement. In the past decade, vast amounts of money flowed from governments and from private sources through supposed non-governmental organizations to facilitate large quantities of illegal migration. To some people, it might sound controversial or inflammatory to point this out because it sounds not compassionate or perhaps racist or xenophobic. It is factual, however, that, for instance, the United States has many problems that require attention among its own citizens and its infrastructure, and these problems don't receive enough resources or attention. But for some reason, during recent years, the entry of several million illegal migrants a year through U.S. borders was permitted, and these migrants were provided with money when they entered the country, they were housed and fed, and their identity was not verified by U.S. border officials with the migrants' home country during the entry process. Many individuals with previous criminal records were let into the U.S. this way, which became evident only later after these individuals were arrested for committing crimes in the U.S. and their background was finally checked. It's a bit curious, is it not? Observers have noted the strange trend in the U.S. where American citizens who were significantly affected by natural disasters in places like Lahaina, Hawaii, or Western North Carolina, with many people losing homes and all their possessions, got very little assistance from the government. Compare this to the fact that in just 2023, New York City alone was reported to have spent nearly $5 billion on its migrant crisis, with significant portions going towards housing. Many hotels in Manhattan were completely filled with migrants in 2024, at the same time that many victims of Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina were kicked out of hotels by the Federal Emergency Management Agency to live in tents due to an apparent lack of funding. I don't advocate being uncaring towards non-citizens or foreigners or those in need. I am simply pointing out that many existing American citizens who plainly needed help did not get the same treatment as illegal immigrants, non-citizens. What created this situation? Why would governments behave this way? News like this is polarizing, and it creates conflict within a population. Some Americans protest the unfairness of illegal migration, and a second group criticizes the first group for being uncaring, racist, xenophobic. Many countries in Western Europe have become burdened under an influx of migrants. The rapid pace of change seems to have outpaced the ability of some areas to adapt, resulting in conflict, and has contributed to the destabilization of certain areas. Immigrants have, for various reasons, sometimes not integrated into the existing culture in various Western European countries, and that is a complex and serious issue to deal with. What does the news report about this? Is migration happening because the migrant's home country was destabilized by war or famine? Is it happening because migrants have limited economic opportunity at home and are motivated to seek a better life abroad? Is it happening because money flows through non-governmental organizations to incentivize migration? If so, what would be the reasoning behind this strategy? Some voices support the notion of illegal immigration, pointing out that current disparities in the world between different groups of peoples are unfair, and we must make the world more equal, and you have to compel charity out of some of the fortunate people who are not spontaneously compassionate, and perhaps to make an omelet you must first break some eggs. You can automatically accept such arguments or parts of them as valid. You can also remain skeptical and ask, for instance, what has influenced such attitudes? Is the hidden money that has been funding illegal migration also been influencing news coverage and creating a school curriculum? I don't know everything. I'm just asking questions. Perhaps attitudes are organic, or perhaps they were manipulated. It is reasonable, I think, to credit the general population with both the compassion to want the best for all people, as well as the desire to maintain stability and order within their own regions. These concepts are not mutually exclusive, and they are both important, and they are not always easy to reconcile. If your house is on fire, I'd like to bring you into my house. If your presence in my house is causing problems, now what? We sometimes have one opinion about a scenario until it happens to us, and then we might gain an additional perspective. I would like to mention just a few passages from the Baha'i teachings that I believe are related to the controversies I have referenced during the past several minutes. Abdu'l-Baha said, quote, "Every country must be properly delimited, its exact frontiers marked, its national integrity secured, its permanent independence protected, and its vital interests honored by the family of nations." Baha'is believe in the oneness of humanity, in helping all people, and in reducing the disparity between the rich and the poor. Yet, the Baha'i teachings do not suggest that we compel these things by any means necessary. Abdu'l-Baha does not advise us to ignore the national integrity of a country or disregard the independence of a country. Listen again to what he said. Quote, "Every country must be properly delimited, its exact frontiers marked, its national integrity secured, its permanent independence protected, and its vital interests honored by the family of nations." Unquote. Wealthy private interests and governments from foreign nations should not be forcing the migration of people or forcing other things into your country, even if it is well-intentioned. And there's evidence in many of these cases that the migration activity was forced in a way that violated existing laws. Your own country should facilitate your freedom and your individual initiative so that you can best contribute to the development of your society, and so your society, in turn, can contribute to the world. Here's a statement from Shoghi Effendi, quote, "The unity of the human race, as envisaged by Baha'u'llah, implies the establishment of a world commonwealth in which all nations, races, creeds, and classes are closely and permanently united, and in which the autonomy of its state members and the personal freedom and initiative of the individuals that compose them are definitely and completely safeguarded." One more quotation. Quote, "The security of the family and the home, the ownership of property, and the right to privacy are all implied in such a trusteeship." Unquote. That comes from the statement, "The Prosperity of Humankind," prepared by the Baha'i International Community Office of Public Information.